Hello and welcome to our digital seminar entitled From Problem to Prevention, Implement Effective Root Cause Analysis and Corrective Actions. And we have with us today Brian Neal. He is the current technical manager for Eurofins Food Assurance, and I'm going to let Brian introduce himself to you.
Thank you, Tammy. Hi, everybody. As Tammy mentioned, my name is Brian Neal. I am the technical manager at Eurofins Food Assurance. I've been working in the CB world for about 11 years now as an auditor and also as a technical manager for different audit teams, including SQF. So thanks for joining. And with that, we'll just kind of get into it. First, a little bit about Eurofins, and I only bring this up because even at the SQF conference recently, a lot of folks, of course, Eurofins is a big lab partner across the globe. But just so everybody's aware, we also have, of course, the audit services, audit certification services. But anyway, just putting that out there. I won't bore you with all that mess. All right, so the agenda today, we're going to kind of go through corrective action, root cause, backwards and forwards, and a little bit in between. And so here's kind of where you can kind of see where we're going to start. So of course, start with the nonconformance. What is it? And all the way through to implementation and everywhere in between. So just quickly before we get going, if you do have any questions, comments, thoughts, just put those out there in the chat. I believe is the way to go about it. And then Tammy will be able to see those and kind of address them as she gets them. So yeah, don't be hesitant to put those out there. All right, first, so nonconformance. What is nonconformance? And Merriam-Webster, of course, they're lost for words here. It's failure to comply. So that's how the good old faithful dictionary defines the term nonconformance. And what it means in real terms is, you do not meet the requirements of the code. Your system does, not you personally, but your system does not meet the requirements of the code. Either partially or fully. So you either may be missing all of the requirement of the code or just partial, elements of the code. So that's what that means as far as SQF goes. And when auditors are auditing your systems and they decide to, issue nonconformance against your food safety management system, if you will. All right, so from the beginning, what that means is not the beginning of the audit, but beginning of receiving those nonconformances and beginning this thought process of developing your corrective actions, your root cause, and kind of proceeding on a path to improvement. So first off, and the most important thing here is, clear understanding of the nonconformance. Do you understand what the nonconformance is that the auditor is giving? Not just what they're saying, but where it falls within the code requirements, how what you have does not meet the requirements of the SQF code, and so forth. And then with that is clear understanding of the actual requirements within the code. So we may have our nonconformance and like, oh yeah, we understand we have a broom where it shouldn't be, but how does that not meet the requirements of the code? And what does the code say? And how does it all mix together? So those are two key elements before you get into any of this, because if you don't understand those two things, what your nonconformance is and how what their code requirement is and how it isn't all pieced together, then you're not going to be able to kind of do the rest of this by developing a proper root cause, developing a proper corrective action to make it fit to where you comply with the code requirements. Understand the intent of the code. And what that means is, Tammy or Leanne always say, it doesn't meet the intent of the code. So it may not be verbatim what the code is asking, but what you're doing doesn't meet the code requirements. It doesn't meet the intent of the code. Assemble a team. So once the auditor leaves, a lot of times what happens is as soon as I leave an audit, the management team all kind of stay in the conference room or whatever room we happen to be in for the closing meeting. And then at that point, they have their powwow and kind of go over the last couple of days of the audit, the nonconformances, how they can improve, what they did good, what they did bad, that kind of thing. But we're talking about assemble your food safety team or whatever team you deem to work on these corrective actions and kind of close out this audit. And as I said, team, not one person. This isn't a one-person show, as we find many occasions where it's up to this QA leader or the SQF practitioner to get all this done. It does take a team effort. So make sure you have a good team, support team behind you to develop these corrective actions and implementation and keep this SQF system going throughout the year. And then with that team, who will do what? So you look at these corrective actions, you see, is it against maintenance? Is it against sanitation? Is it pest control? You see wherever this non-conformance is standing within the requirements, within your programs, and you determine who will be responsible for coming up with that corrective action. Not only coming up with, but implementing that corrective action in the day-to-day process. So that's very important to have your team of people from all over your facility in order to develop a proper corrective action, because you as a QA manager, you as a plant manager, whatever your title is, whatever you do in that building, if you're not maintenance or if you're not in charge of sanitation, you won't be able to come up with a proper corrective action. Even if you do, will it work? So that's why you need to have these team members, take ownership of some of those things. So for sure that moving forward, it's going to work and it's going to be adopted by them and their employees to make it successful. So that's what all that means. All right, so we have our corrective act or our nonconformance in front of us. Now we got to figure out, well, how did this happen? So just a definition within the SQF code for root cause, and I'll just read it here. A method of problem solving to identify and resolve the core issues that cause a nonconformity, deviation, or other adverse food safety or quality event. And as I get in my presentation, I touch on this a bit more, but you almost want to highlight and underline and bold core issue. It's not just whatever that surface is. We see it, for example, it's not the immediate response within our head. Oh, it happened because of this. But is that the only reason? If we fix this, put a Band-Aid on top of it to cover this up, is that going to fix the problem? Probably not. So that's the main important thing there, is figuring out how to resolve this issue all the way down to the floor level, maybe even below the foundation, if you will. All right, so root cause. What caused the issue? And again, going back to the core, and as I said, below the surface, so below the foundation comment, as I said, so dig deep. Don't go for the easy answer, the easy cause of that nonconformance just to get something into your auditor, to your certification body, to get your certificate in hand. And it's not, at the end of the day, I know that the certificate, you all want the certificate, you all need the certificate for different reasons, but still you should want to do this for improvement, for continuous improvement of your facilities, of your programs, of your employees, of yourself. So that's the reason to have really, really good root cause analysis, corrective actions. So dig deep, figure out what it is. It may hurt some people's feelings at the end of the day, but it's all for the good of the cause, to make sure we have good food safety systems in place. We're not harming our consumer, things like that. For methods of corrective actions, there are so many methods out there, good and bad, easy, difficult. The really easy one is just a 5 why. You just ask yourself, why did this happen? And after that, say, well, why? So just keep asking why until you determine, oh, well, now we feel like we're at the bottom floor of how this actually happened. So you can kind of cut it off there, make the decision as a team and say, yes, we feel like we figured it out. We fixed that and all the steps above it, all those whys above it, and then put those things in place. Fishbone diagram, where you have your cause and you kind of fishbone off of there with all your reasons why, and Pareto chart. So there's lots of places, lots of tools on the internet. If you use the Google machine, you'll come plenty of good ways to do an effective root cause. I mean, you don't have to use any of those if you have your own method, but so just there are some tools out there for you to, as an assistant to a root cause. Some examples of maybe you could come up with during your root cause. I mean, one we see all the time is training. Improper training, lack of adequate PM system, lack of monitoring. It even goes all the way back to culture. So I know, food safety culture, it's new, but not new. It's been around for a while here, and it's not going away. And it's even growing more, not only in the food industry, but other industries as well, this culture talk. So it's a big deal, and the culture impacts everything throughout the operation, through everything that we do from our day-to-day operations. So culture, could be a root cause where maybe it was, we didn't have support from our senior leaders kind of deal. So just think about all these things. Of course, there's lots of different, it's just some small examples, what it could be. So just think about that. I know one nonconformance is, management responsibility, and, goes back to those senior leaders, which also ties into food safety culture. So, all right, now as we get into the next bit of the SQF corrective action process. So of course you want to do your root cause first to figure out, how it happened, why it happened, what caused this to be an issue today. Not just the auditor was mean to me or whatever it may be. Another one we see is they overlooked it. So that's also a common one we see that gets rejected. So don't use overlooked. It's not a very good root cause. But so correction is the first step to kind of making this whole system work. Action to eliminate the detected nonconformity identified at a quality audit or undesirable situation. Also has a meaning of corrected. And what that means is if this broom, which shouldn't be on this leaning against this wall, is there during the audit, first of all, we're going to take that broom and put it somewhere else. So that would be how we corrected that immediate thing from getting fixed. So the immediate solution for that nonconformance, what do we do? So that's what the correction is. So the immediate action we did to fix that. If it's a drip from the ceiling, what do we immediately do to stop that drip or stop product from getting contaminated, I guess, if you will. So it's all about the immediate action. And then going into corrective action. So if you look in the SQF code, all these definitions are in there. I pulled it directly from SQF. So, you have exactly what you need to know for the standard. So action to eliminate, it's very close to what the correction was, but action to eliminate the cause of the identified nonconformity, and to prevent reoccurrence. So you have a couple bits to it there, where now we have add prevent reoccurrence. So we'll look at that. So corrective action, preventive control. Sometimes people call it CAPA, CAPA. So whatever you want to call it, but make sure it contains those three things. So you have your correction, what we did to fix it right now, so it doesn't continue to be a problem as we go through our day. Then we have our corrective action, preventative action, and we'll get into that here next. So corrective action, immediate action, that's the correction part of it that we talked about. So the first part we do at the time of the audit, what do we do to fix this thing from what it is? So the broom on the wall, the drip from the ceiling, the hose on the floor, whatever it may be. What did we do? How do we fix it? How will you do it? So how are we going to fix this problem? Who will fix the problem? Document it. Is it effective? So how will you do it? It needs to be very clear how you're going to fix this. You're going to correct this nonconformance. So that's a whole corrective action step. Be very detailed about how we're going to do it with the steps involved. Include who is going to do that. And this could be, when that food safety team, you assemble that food safety team to come up with these corrective actions, you determine at that point, of course, based off your root cause, when you nail down to the exact issue and all the steps in between, as we talked about, who will do those things throughout the process. So it could be maintenance manager, could be sanitation manager, could be the SQF practitioner. So it could involve one person, it could involve multiple people. So make sure you understand who that is to make this a success. And as with anything in your SQF system, anything within your facility, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. So make sure everything is documented. If it's a retraining, if it's, whatever it may be in your management review meetings, make sure everything is documented. And that way, not only for your auditor, your auditing body, when we show up to look at your audits or, do your audit, look at your corrective actions, we see it's documented, but also your customers, they sometimes request your corrective actions and what you did to fix those issues in implementation. And if they show up, as we know that these suppliers or these retailers and these customers still like to show up and do their own thing, they want to see this documentation. So make sure everything's documented. And of course, is it effective? Yeah, we can put a nice pretty corrective action together, tie a bow on it and ship it on its way. But is it actually effective? Does it actually work? So that's where the implementation part comes in, where and we'll get into that. So we don't want to steal the thunder from that side, but is it effective? Preventative action. So this is the last part of, if you will, from that corrective action. So we fixed the problem. Well, first we've identified the root cause of it all, down to the dirt, if you will. We fixed it. And now how we're going to prevent it from happening again, not only this one occurrence, but other places within our processes, our facility. So yeah, we can take that broom off the wall. We say, the employee's not going to put a broom on that wall again. But what if he puts it on the wall across the facility, or throws it on the floor or whatever? So what are we going to do to prevent it from happening again? Not only that exact occurrence, but the similar occurrence around the facility. An example would be if we have a door that doesn't close, we have 25 doors, we fix that door and we say we're going to watch that door, make sure it stays closed all the time. But what about the other 24 doors? So we're going to make sure those other 24 doors don't become a problem. What will keep it from happening? What will keep it away? What will keep it from happening again? So monitoring, for example, could be like we talked about earlier. One of the reasons, the root cause for one of these nonconformances could be related to your preventative maintenance program. Maybe we didn't consider that thing in the preventative maintenance program in the past, where now that's going to be something we do to prevent it from happening again. Is, we added this preventative maintenance program on a daily schedule, and we'll monitor that. If we need to move it out further, we'll move it out to a weekly schedule or a monthly schedule or yearly schedule, whatever that may be. So monitoring, not only PM program, but could be part of your sanitation program that wasn't monitored previously, pest control that wasn't monitored, whatever it may be. So like an example of preventative action, we're going to monitor those doors to make sure they're shut, along with putting it on our PM program to make sure that door closer is working, along with training to make sure employees know to make sure that door is closed after they walk in the building. So things like that. And as I said, training. So proper training. Yeah, we can sit in a room and we can read to our employees and tell them one thing or another, but do they understand it? Are they listening? So proper training goes beyond just sitting here like we are today, talking to you, and hope you're listening, because you don't know, because they may be thinking about what they're going to have for dinner or whatever it may be. So that goes back to the fact of making sure that person is knowledgeable after you deliver the training. So that's on job kind of observations, for the implementation of that training kind of deal. So documented training as well. All right, so next is implementation. And this is probably the most important part of all this, because we could have we fixed it, we removed that broom, we picked up that hose, we closed the door. We said we're going to do all these fun things, and we have it on this piece of paper that we sent it to the auditor. The auditor said, okay, great, looks good. And now you have a certificate. So we can do this. And that's the easy part. The difficult part is making sure that we keep doing this, not only today, but tomorrow, in the next, all the days ahead of us, until something changes that now we have to reevaluate and put something else in place. So implementation is probably the most important part of this corrective action process. So again, now that we have our corrective actions, documented, we assemble the team, we make sure the implementation is going to happen. So we talk to the maintenance manager, we talk to the sanitation team, we talk to pest control, whoever it may be, and we let them know for sure what's expectations, if there's retraining or training required. Make sure that's happened, the documentation has happened. We know that the training was effective by, maybe that's watching the employees on the floor, watching the pest control guys. He comes in to make sure he's putting bait in the traps, whatever it may be. So on the job, I guess, observations to make sure that training was adequate. Record keeping, if it was, you've added to monitoring step in, that's great. You're monitoring, you're using your eyeballs to make sure these things aren't happening again, but are you documenting that this is happening, that you're doing these monitoring steps? So if it is, something around sanitation, or if it's around pest control, or that broom on the wall, or that hose on the floor, and we say 3 times a day we're going to walk around and make sure these things aren't happening, do we have a checkbox or an initial mark, or on a record somewhere that this is happening in your SSOP form, some sort of a document where we are going around and physically looking at these things that we identified as, or the auditor identified as nonconformances? We develop a corrective action. Part of that corrective action process is we will now do this monitoring step. So make sure you are documenting that monitoring step. Because like I said earlier, if it's not documented, it didn't happen and you're not doing it. So it's fun and it's easy to say, yeah, we're doing it. We just can't prove we're doing it. So at that point, you aren't doing it. So make sure what you say you're going to do, you back it up with some documentation. Ongoing monitoring. This just goes back to what I said earlier, that we're not just going to do it today or tomorrow or next week. It's going to be an everyday thing. So it goes back to culture. It could be a shift in your culture where if it's a big thing, you have to get these employees on board. You have to get your senior leaders on board. So it's ongoing effort, if you will, to ensure the success of not only the corrective action, but of your system. Because we know there's going to be, it's inevitable. The auditor shows up and something happened, goes wrong. That's fine. It's about what you do next that matters. So ongoing monitoring, just kind of continuous improvement, as we'll get into. And then test the system. What that means is, with your corrective action, and I said effective early on the slide previously, does it work? And that's all about testing your system. So as an example, on the broom thing, we've trained our employees, we put a monitoring step in place, we've done all these things, or even going to open door, test the system, leave that door open and see what happens next. Leave that broom on the wall, leave the hose on the floor and see what happens next, to see if somebody notices it and corrects the situation. Or if you watch it and nothing happens, people walk by, that broom still stays there, that door still stays open, then something didn't work. And you need to evaluate that corrective action, say, we have this in place, but it didn't work. Something wasn't effective in our process. So we need to go back and readjust and improve, as it says there, evaluate and improve. And this goes back to also, it's ongoing. So yeah, we can put this corrective action in place where it looks good on paper. Is it effective? Does it work? Did the implementation work? So that's why we have to reevaluate these corrective actions, test the system to make sure people know what they're doing, make sure that corrective action works. And if not, improve. Even if it does work, there's always room for improvement. So, improve your systems all the time. I guess what it comes out to. Kind of in summary here is, proper corrective action is key. So there's 3 parts to your corrective action, maybe 4 parts. So you have your root cause analysis, where you drill down to the bottom level of what caused that nonconformity. So you have 5, 6 whys, maybe 7 whys, steps up or down, whichever way you want to go about it. And at that point, identify that root cause, correct that root cause, but not only that, all those steps above that root cause where you drill down. So we've identified, for example, the door doesn't close. Well, why doesn't the door close? Well, because the door closer is broken. Well, why? Well, because it's not on PS. So all those steps in between, we need to address all those steps, not just the root cause of the closer's broken or whatever it may be. We need to address all those situations in between that as well, from start to finish. So that's your root cause. Correction, of course, is we fixed it, what we did immediately to fix that problem. In your corrective action, preventative action, what are we doing to fix this problem? And not just fix it now, but fix it from happening in the future, throughout our facility. So make sure you do a proper corrective action. This is one thing that we see as auditors quite often, where the corrective action isn't proper. And that's no fault of anyone's. It's just, unfortunately, it was accepted in the past. And we're trying to improve not only your systems, but our systems as well, to ensure that auditors, and we do training on this for auditors as well, to ensure they understand what a proper corrective action and root cause looks like. So it's a difficult thing, but once you get it, it helps everybody out. Implementation is key. As I said, maybe the most important thing for any corrective action, not just put it on paper. Let's say the QA manager, SQF practitioner, plant manager, your food safety team, whoever it may be, you develop this wonderful corrective action on this non-conformance report that you send back to your certification body, and they just file it away for late never use, we'll say. Make sure that is actually being implemented. So if it's one non-conformance or 25 non-conformances, make sure every one of those corrective actions have been implemented. They have been found effective, and not just effective today, but effective, throughout the year and next year and years to come. And if they need to change, that's where that reevaluate and improve thing comes from, because your systems change. No, nothing stays the same. So there's always change. So make sure that you always make those improvements throughout the system as well. Understanding by everyone, and understanding not only of the corrective action, but of how you were not compliant with the SQF code. So where did we go wrong, and why did we go wrong? And here's what we're going to do to fix it and make sure it doesn't happen again. So understanding throughout, not just understanding the corrective action, because they may see the corrective action but not understand why we had to have it there, how it's going to fix or make things better for us. Something that I didn't mention, but speaking of food safety culture, is one of the points of food safety culture you could be is you have daily, weekly, monthly meetings with all of the employees and go over these audit findings with them, and not just the findings of how we were not compliant with the SQF code and what we could do better, but here's what we're going to do to fix it. Because, and I say that because you may have your team of 1 to 10 people, whoever it may be on your food safety team, that come up with these fixes, but there maybe you have an operator on the floor running a piece of equipment who may know that that's not going to work. And that might come out in the corrective action process, but maybe not. So it's good to make sure your people are aware, and that goes in the training and understanding of your employees as well. Internal audits, management reviews. So through your internal audit process, when you take that SQF code or whatever method you use for your internal audit of your processes, you will identify these gaps as well, or you hopefully identify these gaps where you develop these corrective actions throughout the year as you do your internal audits, and you put these things in place. Discuss everything in your management review. It's one of those things you got to put it all on the table, if you will. The findings from your internal audits, the corrective actions through those internal audits, through your third-party audits, be it SQF or whatever it may be, your supplier audits, if you will. So discuss all this in your management reviews. And this is for many things, not just to put it out there that we've had these things and it's one of the requirements of SQF, but to make sure everybody is aware, that understanding, if you will, by everyone, and to maybe there's different thoughts out there that may help us improve a little better. And culture, as I said, all of this at the end of the day, not all of it, a lot of it could go back to culture of not only your senior leaders, but of your employees. I mean, maybe they see that door open, but they're in a hurry to get back on the line because they're late from their break, or if they're late to go home, they just run out and don't see if the door's closed. So it goes back to culture. A lot of this could be tied back to culture. So make sure you have a sound culture in place at your facilities, food safety culture, with your employees, with your senior leaders, with all your processes. And that will help make things a little easier with these corrective actions with your systems to make sure that they run successfully. So that's what it's all about. It's not about making me, the auditor, happy or making Tammy, SQF, happy. It's about making sure your programs are effective, you have continuous improvement, and they work for you, and they don't, at the end of the day, that's what it's about. We don't want to make people sick. We're doing it for food safety. So we just want to do it for the consumers, make sure doing is right for the world, if you will. The superheroes of food safety is what we do. So anyway, with that, it was a short presentation, but hopefully, people got some information out of it. And so with that, I'll pass it back to Tammy for any questions.
Yeah, so no worries on the length of the presentation. I think a lot of people like the short presentations, and then the talk afterwards is where they get a lot of their good takeaways. So we do have some questions that came in, so I want to cover those with you. So Leah asked, is there a general method to be used when doing a root cause analysis to know that I'm implementing the proper corrective action? So from a code perspective, we don't have a specific requirement for a method, but do you have a favorite, tool to use for root cause analysis, or one you would recommend?
Yeah, mine is, it's just simple. It's the 5 whys, or however many whys you want to use. It doesn't, you can use as many as you want to drill down to the root cause. I think that's the simplest. It does take a little more, it does take some brain power, of course. And I know we're all smart people, because you have to say, well, why is that door open? Well, just because somebody left it open. Oh, okay, well, let's leave it there. Or because the closer's broken, and was okay, let's leave it there. So it does take to really nail down to get to that root cause. But I think it's the simplest to use, because you just keep asking yourself why. And if you, once you ask yourself why, and you're like, well, I got nothing else, then at that point, you've finished and you've gone down to the ground floor, and you can start with the corrective action process at that point.
Yeah, I would agree, Brian. I think that is one of the easiest. I came out of the automotive industry, so I tell people all the
Mm.
time that, they do 5 whys 3 ways. So you do 5 whys on why it occurred. So why was the door left open? You do why it wasn't detected. So why didn't anybody see the door open and close it? And then why did the system allow it to happen? And then a lot of times you'll get into your procedures or your PMs. There was no PM on the door. So that's, why the system allowed it to happen. So if I'm doing a 5 why, I like the 5 why 3 ways, because it really helps you to separate between detection and procedural activities versus the true why of why it occurred. So yeah, I like that one too. Of course, fishbone diagram, always great, right? But again, you need to find the tool that fits the problem, because, a fishbone's not great for every problem. All right, so next question. So somebody asked, does implementation require a change management program?
Well, it could, depending, because you are changing procedures most of the times. You are changing processes a lot of times. You're changing people's thoughts a lot of times. So yeah, it definitely could involve a change management program, because you are changing your food safety management system, if you will, because these Brexit programs, they all impact that food safety management system. Supporting Brexit programs, if you will, that support your management system. So yeah, it definitely could involve a change management system, if you have that in place, or you have a process or a procedure for change management. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you look in the code, I think it's 2.3.1. A lot of people think that that applies only to new products and formulations, but if you read the elements in there, it really talks about change management. So if you change a procedure or a process or an piece of equipment or something, there's requirements around how you handle that. So great question. Stacy asked, what is the time frame allowed for corrective actions?
Yeah, according to SQF, in the code, it says 30 days from the last date of the audit to get your corrective actions into the auditor, um, so that they can be closed out effectively, to get that certification decision made within 45 days and things like that. So you have 30 days to get that. And with all, hopefully as I can give, that auditor will leave a copy of that at the closing meeting, as they should. So you can immediately start working on that. Of course, and hopefully, again, it's not a surprise what these nonconformances are at the closing meeting. You shouldn't have any surprises at the closing meeting. No arguments back and forth because of the nonconformance. It all should be pretty knowledgeable by the time you have your closing meeting, because all these things should come up throughout the audit process as the auditor finds them. Hopefully, at that point, they're addressing them, not only to let you know that there's a problem, but maybe that there's something that the auditor is not seeing within a record, maybe, or within a procedure that they're not seeing. Maybe you do it a different way, and it's just outside of the auditor's vision, if you will. So hopefully there's no surprises, and hopefully they're leaving a copy of those nonconformances with you when they leave that facility.
Yeah, great point. And I'm glad you talked about, during the discussion, there may have been something the auditor could have missed. I mean, that's always possible. So we were just talking about it yesterday, and I said to a group of people that the first part of your appeal process is talking to the auditor before he leaves the building. So, because he could have missed something, he may have just misread something or overlooked something. So, appeal to the auditor before he leaves the building if there's something that you don't agree with those nonconformances. So great. Let's see. While we are testing the system, if it fails, do we need to reinitiate a new nonconformance, or do we just make an adjustment?
Well, and that could be, so part of the SKF requirement again is that you have corrective action process in place for whatever step of the, if that's in your internal audit or in your, wherever it may be. So as you're evaluating, and it's mainly around if you find that the corrective action is not effective, then at that point you adjust your corrective action. But at the same time, if you dig up another problem that you didn't identify throughout your root cause or throughout your corrective action process, then yeah, you could issue yourself a nonconformance, an internal nonconformance against that as part of your audit process, if you will, within your four walls. And then at that point, you initiate your corrective action process, and you can develop a corrective action based off that new problem that has you found as part of the evaluation process.
Yeah, no, great point. So we've got a question. What are the main differences of corrective actions and preventative actions? And would you please provide examples? So I know Brian and I both have examples for corrective actions and preventative actions. So you want to go first, Brian, or you want me to go first?
Yeah, you can go first, Tammy. Yeah, of course.
Well, people always hear my my hose on the floor story. So, but it's a good one, and I think it reemphasizes the difference. So, I came across an air hose laying on the floor. So, my correction, I picked up the air hose, immediate nonconformity taken care of. And then the root cause I discovered was because the air hose was too far away from where the hose reel was at. So when you actually tried to retract the hose, you practically got pulled under the production line. And so it was a personal safety issue. So our corrective action was to take that one hose reel and move it to the point of use. And then our preventative action was we looked at all the other hose reels in the building because we had a lot of them. And we made sure that they were at the right location to prevent that same problem from occurring on a similar product or process. So that's kind of the way I look at the difference between corrective and preventative actions. I know, Brian, you've got some examples. I know you were looking at the mouse, catching the mouse. I don't know if you've got another good one you want to share.
Yeah, I think just the example I used throughout the webinar here is with the door, because we see it all the time. I know you guys see it all the time, because those little closers in the door, those automatic closers don't always work. So, I've issued a couple nonconformances. I've seen them for open doors leading into the facility. So that's a good example where the correction would be we close the door, of course, problem solved. Root cause is you go back down to, as I mentioned, the closer wasn't working, is our root cause. Well, why wasn't working? Well, we don't have it on a PM program to identify that it wasn't working properly. There was no notification to us on a work order, for example, that it wasn't working. So corrective action would be then we replace that closer and put that door on a PM program. But to prevent it from happening again, not only put that door on a PM program, but all the doors in the facility on a PM program and monitoring program. And then also retraining of those auditors to ensure that they know before they run home or run back to work that door is actually closed behind them, to allow or not to allow, a mouse to come in, or allow to, whatever it may be. So I think it's a pretty good one.
Yeah, no, that's a great example. And I don't know a lot about door closers, but I would think there have to be like different different levels of door closers. I mean, is
Yeah,
there
yeah,
something like industrial door closers versus one that I would install at my house? I
yeah.
would think there might be a difference there. So we might need, maybe we have the wrong door closer on. I don't know.
Yeah, even
So,
even some of them have an adjustment on the top, so you can just adjust it. But yeah, there's all kinds of reasons for
oh
sure.
yeah, yeah. Could be out of adjustment. I like that. So there was a follow-up question about the getting the corrective actions in on time. And I did want to mention that I know some of our certification bodies have different timelines. So some of them want them in earlier than 30 days. So please check with your
Yeah.
certification body because 30 days is for the auditor to close it out. So typically, you want to get it in before that 30 days. But the follow-up question was, what about corrective actions other than SQF audit corrective actions? Is there a deadline internally that they should have for things that happen within the building?
Yeah, so it's all up to you to determine what's reasonable. If that's 30 days, if that's 10 days, if that's 5 days, if that's what a reasonable timeline. So, for example, when I go on and do an audit and I see you have identified something on your internal audit from January, and here we are in May, and it's still open, I'll ask, well, why is this still open? And if it's because it requires a capital investment of $400,000 and that's not going to come till July, but here's what we've done in the meantime, maybe, yeah, sure. But if it's, that door that we go back to, you don't have a corrective action in place. So it's set a timeline within your procedures. Do that for yourself. If you have a goal of 30 days, that way you are at that point compliant with SQF, and your facility, your internal staff are comfortable with that 30-day window. At that point, they know what to expect. It's not a shock when SQF comes along and now we have 30 days. So it might be a good idea to stick with that, but it's up to you to determine what that is. But make sure it's a reasonable timeline. Not we have a year to close these things out. So I think that's what it comes down to, because auditors will look at those findings that you identify internally, and if something's being open for a crazy amount of time, or if it just looks like a simple fix and there's nothing documented to show otherwise, then it could be a problem with your corrective action system.
Yeah, no, that's great. Also, someone wanted to know about, is that 30 calendar days or business days? It is 30 calendar days
Yeah.
for the SQF audit, corrective actions to be closed out. So, um, and then let's see. Da, da, da. Lots of people wanting to know about the recording, and Koo has answered that in the chat. There is a recording of it. So, okay. Somebody suggested corrective action for your door example was lock that door.
Yeah,
Don't
it's a
let
good thing
people
to
in and
do
out
for
that
sure.
door.
Yeah.
So now we got a permanent corrective action there. Okay, we still have questions coming in. This is great. Somebody said, according to with your experience, what tool is the best to determine the real root cause? And I think we kind of touched on that. Brian said 5Y. I mentioned fishbone diagram. There are lots of others out there. I think Brian's slides, one of them had a Pareto chart that could assist as well. So lots of good ones out there. So, but find one. I don't know about you, Brian, but I hate when I see somebody write their corrective action procedure and they dictate what tool has to be used.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Agreed.
know,
Yeah, and also with that, as Tam mentioned, there's so many tools out there. If you find one like the fishbone diagram or the Pareto, make sure you understand it and make sure it fits with what you're trying to accomplish, like Tammy said. So, because some of them can be kind of difficult to understand, so make sure you really understand it, and make sure it's going to work for you.
absolutely. Okay, so someone asked this question and I was going to bring it up if nobody did. So normally training or retraining is used as one of the corrective actions. That makes me cringe. Just gonna say it makes me cringe. But how can you monitor the effectiveness of training? So, Brian, you want to talk about effectiveness of training? Do you have some suggestions there?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we see it very commonly where training is done for lack of training for root cause, and we retrained as our corrective action and call it a day. So yeah, that could definitely be your corrective action if that's what you figure out in your root cause. or part of your corrective action. And for effectiveness, sorry, it's all like I said, if it is the door, if it is the hose, and you put this training in place to make sure people are reeling that hose back in or slamming that door shut or locking it, whatever your corrective action was, you set them up just like you would when you challenge your food defense system. You set it up so you throw that hose on the floor, you open that door, and you just stand back and watch to say, oh, an employee went over, shut that door, and scolded the person who left it open, whatever, not scolded, but little nicer. Or they put that hose back up and they notified their manager that the hose was down, and have maintenance check out that hose reel. So that's one good thing for check effectiveness of something like that, more where it's more physical. When it's like a GMP issue, for example, it could be you have maybe knowledge exams. You could have on the job where the supervisor or the line lead or the manager goes out and they talk to the employee. Hey, how do you do this HACCP monitoring, your CCP monitoring? And you have them show that to you to ensure that they understand how to adequately stab this meatball and get the temperature and why they're doing it and what those temperature requirements should be and what happens if it's this. So as an example, if it's around the employee didn't know how to do the temperature monitoring, their CCP step, you could do something like that. There's lots of different ideas for that.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to add, about training and retraining. One of the biggest mistakes that we see in sites doing root cause analysis, and I don't know if you've seen this as well, Brian, is that they'll come up with a root cause and then their corrective action is training.
Yeah.
Well, but their root cause had nothing to do with training. So if your corrective action is going to be training, then the root cause is there was something wrong with the training. So if it was lack of training, okay, so we're going to train. I like that you had training on your implementation slide, Brian, rather than your corrective action slide, because that really is a piece of implementation. So we're going to implement a new process and we're going to train on it. So it's not that our corrective action is the training, because the root cause wasn't training. And then when people say we're going to retrain, I just want to remind people of the definition of insanity. It's when we do the same thing over again and we expect a different result. So I just caution people when we say retraining, because if you're going to tell me that it was the training that was the problem, so we're going to retrain, what are you going to do differently? What was wrong with the training that people didn't understand it to begin with? So, sometimes we train people by putting them in a room and letting them click through a PowerPoint, so are we going to retrain them by having them sitting in a training class with a live teacher? Is that going to make the training more effective? So I just caution people when they use the words retraining as a part of their corrective action. So,
yeah, good point.
Let's see. Somebody has a question. Is there a situation where a corrective action wouldn't be applicable and only a preventative action? For example, if meeting notes were not taken for a meeting that had already passed.
Yeah, that's a difficult one because you can't go back and recreate those records. That causes a whole nother ball of problems you don't want to get involved in. So yeah, I mean, that's a good question, because if for example, a record didn't get completed, if it's a meeting or sanitation records didn't completed, what root cause is, well, where that person wasn't around or whatever it may be. So yeah, the corrective action for immediate fix was, we talk to that person and let them know these need to be completed every day, and if not, you need to have, if you're not here, you need to have a backup, if you will. So for like a record, a sanitation record, because that person thought, oh, I'm going on vacation, it's all fine. They didn't know if somebody was going to do their job or not. Maybe they didn't care because they're going to go sit on the beach somewhere. But for like if you don't have training records or records of training of your employees because it not documented, didn't happen. Yeah, it's difficult to come up with that, because what correction do you put in place other than maybe updating our training program to say, keep record of it. Prevention is easy. I don't know if Tam, if you have any thoughts on it.
I guess my thought was, and I know what path you were talking about going down is kind of a slippery slope. I kind of look at it this way. If, and one thing where we see records missing a lot is management review. So the site did their management review. They didn't take minutes and they didn't record follow-up action items. So, is there a correction there to be had? Well, someone that was in the meeting could certainly type up meeting minutes, because there's nothing that says, you have to take the meeting minutes down as the meeting's happening. So, but Brian was heading down the path of falsification. So, you can't falsify records. If something didn't happen, you can't, make up those records. Or if you're not sure whether it happened or not, like a master sanitation schedule that didn't get filled in and you're not sure, we don't want you to falsify. You do need to document, however, in an internal nonconformance that you identify those records weren't completed. But like Brian said, there may not always be a correction. And I think that was really where that question was headed.
Yeah.
Instead of corrective action, I think it was correction. There may not always be a correction, for sure. So, and then Leah put in the comment, if there is no record, it didn't happen. Well, I just want to remind you that there are required records within the code. But there are 3 ways to collect evidence. So it's records, interviews, and observations. So unless the code specifically says a record is required, there are other methods to determine that something happened or didn't happen. So just keep that in mind. Leah suggested also you need to have the meeting again. Okay, bring everybody together and let's agree on what the meeting minutes should say. That's an idea, kind of like that. Let's see, we've still got more questions and we still have about 9 minutes. So, there's one specific one. If we had a corrective action for replacing a damaged insulation, but we are waiting for the material to arrive and we had given 30 days and the auditor shows up and he still gives a non-conformance. So it kind of sounds like they had an internal non-conformance that they identified damaged insulation. So from an auditor's perspective, Brian, how would you look at that? Would you give a non-conformance because there's a hole in the wall? Or would you understand that there's a corrective action in process and you would not write a non-conformance?
Yeah. So if I walk into a facility, there's a hole in the wall, you have exposed insulation, you identified on your internal audit, your facility inspection. That's great. You've done that. And yeah, if part of that is, what did you do in the meantime to make sure that doesn't cause an issue? Did we put plastic over it? Did we put caulking over it? Whatever it may be, until the new panel comes in. But let's say you did all that, but we don't have the new panel in yet. What I look for is you're taking steps to make sure that's happening. So we've ordered the panel, it's on back order, it'll be here in 7.5 months or whatever. But you have that identified within your notes on your corrective action. So you're taking steps to make sure it's getting fixed. You're not just saying, we'll get it when we get it kind of deal. We have this evidence to show that you are doing something until that new panel shows up or till that permanent fix shows up. So that's what I look for.
Yeah, no, that I would have answered that exactly the same way. Next question, does the CB or auditor have to let you know the CAPA has been approved and closed out? I have worked with multiple certification bodies and this is an issue with all of them. Is it not a requirement of a CB to do this? I don't know, Brian, if you want to speak to what Eurofins does when it comes to letting sites know that their corrective actions have been approved, and then I can speak from a general SQF requirement.
Yes, so I see both ways where, for example, the auditor will go back and say, looks good, thank you for your help. And sorry for my dog, he's barking at who knows what.
We can't hear him, Brian. I can't even hear him.
Okay. But yeah, so the auditors, we tell our auditors to go back and let the sites know everything looks good, just so you don't keep their guessing in case you don't get your certificate for another 10 days because of the process. So you're not wondering if everything's good or bad. So I see it both ways. We like for our auditors to go back to the sites. And it is a challenge, but that's what we tell our auditors to do.
Yeah. And from a SQF perspective, we don't have it written down that says you shall, contact the site and let them know that the corrective actions were closed out. You're obviously going to know that when you get your certificate. But we have a new database, a new SQF assessment database that is launching. And so that will actually give sites real-time viewing as to the status of their corrective actions without the auditor having to communicate back. So the auditor, if they accept it, the site will be able to see immediately it was accepted. If it's rejected, they'll also be able to immediately see that as well. So hang on, anonymous attendee, it's coming. We're going to make that process a little bit better for everybody. Okay.
Yeah, that's all. I think I'm very excited about that. And I think it's going to help everybody out, especially we've all endured for last year. So I think we're all excited about the changes to come.
Yeah, me too. Real quick, we had a follow-up to that. If I submit corrective action, the auditor gets back to me and it's rejected, do we get an additional 30 days? That's a no. You get 30 days, and that's for the auditor to close out the corrective action. So please don't wait till day 29 to submit your corrective action to the auditor, because if it does get rejected on day 30, then you're probably going to be late to getting your corrective actions closed out. So don't be a day 39 or 29 girl.
And that's 30 days from the last date of the audit, not from the date. Let's say if the auditor doesn't give you the list of nonconformances until a week later, it's not from that date. It's from that last date of the audit. That's when the clock starts ticking.
Yep, last date of the audit. And as Brian mentioned a couple times, the auditor is required to leave a list of nonconformances with you before they leave the building. So if the auditor happens to not give you one, then please request it, ask for it, and let the CB know if you didn't get that. So that should be left with you because the clock is starting right then when they leave the building and your 30 days has started. So make sure you get that list of corrective actions, understanding that they're preliminary, because the CB is still going to do that technical review, and those could change, but it at least gives you something to start with. Okay. I'm going to see one more. We've got 3 minutes. Let's see. Can the auditor change the nonconformances from the audit after they leave? If the clock starts, that can create issues. I think I just kind of answered that. The entire audit, including nonconformances, have to go through a technical review, and there may be changes made. But you know, you can at least still be getting started.
Yeah.
Okay. And then somebody had a database question. Let's pick that one up. Will the database be free to the public, or will retailers need a subscription, and what access will they have? So our new database will drive our public directory, and that will be free. So you will be able to, as retailers, see the status of all certified and all certified sites. And then you will be able to see if that status has been moved to inactive or suspended or withdrawn. So you'll be able to see the status of all of those certificates. Okay. We have 2 more minutes. Let's see. I am for product complaints. If the case is about the customer being allergic or having an allergic reaction to the product or ingredient, does advise quality as a corrective? So all right. So we've had a customer complaint. Somebody's had an allergic reaction to our product. So somebody listing a corrective action as advising quality, and their preventive action is put a warning for food allergens. Is that good? Or should there be a root cause applied to this specific issue? And I'm sure you see that all the time, Brian.
Yeah, you should definitely do a root cause, because it may just be tied to one person. Maybe they have a sensitivity to something that not many people do, but you don't know that for sure. So that might include testing of retention samples of your film. So there could be a lot of things other than telling quality and putting a statement on our packaging. So you need to dig a little bit deeper to see if what really caused that. It might have been a contaminant. So you just don't know until you really look into it.
Yeah, no, great point. We got a nonconformance that a light wasn't protected. It was confirmed after the audit that the light was LED. How is such a nonconformance supposed to be handled?
Yeah, that's part of your appeals process that should be discussed by the auditor, but you can always appeal it. So if it comes back that you determine that, oh yeah, we just couldn't see it, and it's not shatterproof, then you put that in your appeals process, and then you kind of work through the process at that point to get that non-conformance removed by support, extending that evidence in.
Appeal to Brian first, and
Yep, yep.
then SQF, if the certification body denies your appeal and you still feel like you're right, you can appeal to us. Gosh, we're getting really close. I know we're at the top of the hour. Brian, have you got time for just another minute or
Yep,
two?
yep.
Okay. Do we have to check the effectiveness of the CAPA program in general? And if so, do you have any recommended methods?
Yeah, of course. I mean, just like what you would with any of your programs. So through your internal audit, through your management review, you want to make sure that your programs are effective too. So part of your CAPA program might not include an adequate root cause or an adequate correction step. So you definitely want to look at the effectiveness of those programs to make sure it meets the requirements of what you need to put in place through this non-conformance process. So yeah, I mean, it just looking at the requirements of SQF, for example, or even just look at anywhere on the internet, effective corrective actions, and kind of make sure your CAPA program has that in place.
Yeah, and one thing that you can do for your CAPA program is look at reoccurrence. So how effective are you at closing issues and they stay closed and they don't reoccur?
Good point.
Okay. Somebody posted, what can happen if we receive just one nonconformity and we don't do our corrective action in time?
So according to the SQF code, if we don't get your nonconformities closed up, even if it's one, within that 30-day window, your certificate, if you already have a certificate, could be suspended. If it's your initial, you may not be granted certification. So it does have a pretty big impact, even if you have a score of 99. So it is important to follow the guidelines within the code.
I would agree. Just because it was only one doesn't mean
Yeah.
that you're not subject to the requirement to close it out. So
Yeah.
big consequences too. Well, Brian, thank you so much for being with us today. And we appreciate everyone that joined. We had a pretty big group, and thank you all for hanging in as we went a couple minutes after, wanted to get all those questions answered. So again, thank you all very much.
Thank you. Have a good day.